Busloads of school children were encouraged to pay their respect by visiting the hanging traitor and read the judgment paper attached to his chest. Unfortunately, it was an ugly experience to witness. I remember the empty streets normally bustling with activity when I took a stroll, observing soldiers with their guns and army tanks rolling along the streets. This was during one of the school holidays. It was eerie and frightening, just like in the movies, except it was happening in real life. The feeling was that someone could be shot, and it could be me. One soldier approached me and said, "But you are going home, aren't you?" I answered him with a definite yes, and continued walking. I wanted to see one of my school friends. I just cannot forget that time of unrest when in Ankara. Today's current constitution was adopted in 1961. Members of the Republican People's Party were chosen for the highest office. İsmet İnönü became Prime Minister and Gürsel became President. In 1965, the Justice Party won the majority in the government, and its leader Süleyman Demirci became Prime Minister. Gürsel continued in his post until 1966. But I had already left the country for good in 1963. I will tell you more about that issue a little later. Although Atatürk revolutionized Turkey and brought wonderful changes culturally, such as freedom of speech and expression, yet throughout the years some people still prefer the pre-Atatürk days, still fantasizing about totally Islamizing Turkish society, its education system, and the army. They seem to be succeeding. Let us not forget that there are political parties which prefer to return back to the days when they used the Arabic alphabet, whilst also applying Islamic rules to their everyday lives. Perhaps harems will become available once again when a Turkish caliphate is established, or an Ayatollah regime is introduced. And who can guess that perhaps women will lose all their human rights? Would modern Turks allow it? Long before their partial sojourn in Anatolia, believing they may be able to claim their once-upon-a-time real estate, my father, together with his other relatives, preferred to stay in Istanbul, owing vast amounts of money due to his gambling. It seemed he was involved in other activities which may not have been very ethical or desirable. On the other hand, my mother, with her background, was a very determined person who studied hard for a beautiful career in dress design, including creations for Christian Dior in Paris. She excelled in her skills and had her own salon, employing many others. While in Turkey, after traveling from the city of Yozgat to Ankara, some older relatives imagined that she and my father, despite being cousins, could help each other if they lived together, thereby helping one's relatives, which they believed was the appropriate thing to do. Obviously, they did not know or want to know the actual circumstances. I felt that it was more or less to help the miserable young man with his dilemmas. After all, my mother was generating a good income. After negotiations and many wonderful promises, they got married. Things apparently looked really brilliant. However, it seemed that my father had a different agenda. For instance, by making use of his wife's wealth, he could become free from his debts. She has indeed paid vast amounts towards what he owed, as well as his habit of betting on the horses. He was more passionate about horse racing than anything else. He was not interested in having a family to love and cherish. His marriage was not based upon love, nor did he have any desire for it. My father did not know what true love was, and he was, as far as I could see, totally devoid of it. It seemed that the military was the only thing he cared for, even in a commanding post. But if this was true, in a country where he endured hardships, being treated as if he was nobody due to his origins, he had no chance to progress it was obvious that he had lived without his parents most of his life and did not know what parental care and love was. He grew up in a loveless society, in a loveless home, and the war years took their toll. 8 years before my birth, in 1943, my mother's sister had a reasonably happy marriage and 2 sons who my mother adored. I think that it was due to becoming their caregiver and surrogate mother, feeding them with her own breast milk. Apparently my aunt could not feed them, and her husband had been murdered by a group of hooligans after his work on completion of an important electrical job. His life ended due to evil intent, jealousies, and racially motivated hatred. And when his body was discovered, his head had been stabbed many times by those criminals using his tools and screwdrivers. No one was punished by their law for killing an Armenian dog. I suppose my mother felt the need to take responsibility and care for them, partially to assist her sister Perlanti. I feel by now that you would like to ask me where those names you read and perhaps find hard to pronounce come from. As mentioned before, they are ancient names originating in Sanskrit, Norwegian, Greek, and Armenian. You may also find them in India and in the South Americas, as I did during my adult years. It can give you some clues about my origins. According to my father, he initially did not want to be married, but was apparently forced into it. He did not want to have a family and children unless he could treat them like some men from patriarchal backgrounds, as it was throughout the Middle East or Europe of the Middle Ages. Then again, probably he did not know anything about how to be a father, or did not desire to be responsible for important finances, which were deemed necessary for the welfare and education of his children. He wanted to have a life of ease for reasons known only to him. My mother was the one who provided food, clothing, and did all sorts of things through her profession for the upkeep of the home, while my father occupied himself as a watchmaker for the Swiss Zenith Watch Company after his army days. His earnings were spent on the horses and other gambling habits. I believe his upbringing had a lot to do with his character, like Muslim tribesmen, just looking after his own interests. But he was neither religious nor had anything to do with the Muslim faith. According to what my mother clearly explained, he was intent to bring home gigolos to her with plenty of money. In other words, he wanted her to become his whore, thus making lots of money in his imaginations. He was very upset and extremely angry with her for not accepting his generous offer. He obviously felt his plans were being ruined. He bitterly hated his own parents and my mother's mother. I believe it was due to them forcing him to marry. In all honesty, I could not understand the reasons behind this situation, and my mother avoided talking about the issue. Over time, he threatened my mother, shouting that he had spent his sperms, and he would take them away by killing the child born into his unwanted family. He reasoned that he could easily take it away, because he was the father, and nobody could ever stop him. This trend got worse as time went by. Sometimes he did not come home at night, and on arrival in the morning he slept long hours in his own quarters, later waking up to hurt his wife with his physical and verbal abuses yet again. On the other hand, my mother took it as being her destiny, praying that things would get better. During their reasonably calmer days, they visited some of his friends, even at one stage going to a photographic studio to have family photos taken as was customary in those days. I remember how my mother once held me behind the heavy velvet curtain in the studio. They took an infant picture of me naked. my mother proudly displaying the enlarged, hand-colored photograph of me on the wall. When a little over 2 years old, I used to ask her why she chose to live with this terrible person, making her wonder how it was possible for a toddler to ask such a question. 2 years later, on the 13th of March, 1945, my brother was born. He was the other one to follow me. Happy times were very rare and far between. However, on a lighter side of things, on one of those occasions, some parents used to dress their sons like girls, or vice versa, just for fun, during photographic sessions. I remember when our mother and aunt took us to a local studio where my brother was dressed like a girl. It probably provided a light-hearted conversation amongst friends. We were inseparable as brothers, playing happily together, eating, sleeping, and enjoying the outdoors. Sometimes we were a little noisy, but as long as we did not see our father, or he was not around, the happier we were. However, at birth my brother had to have an immediate medical procedure to separate his penis from inside his testes. My mother was so immensely happy about a Dr. Kamil Sokollu, who performed the delicate surgery, and often talked about what a brilliant doctor he was. My father did not contribute anything towards the cost. He would not care, even if we were family dogs. This is said in all honesty, for it is factual. My parents' relationship worsened with every passing day, and there were so many things I could not understand. For example, where I was allegedly born was never clearly explained. The only explanation was that I was born. A few other lies have also been told to us children, including how a stork had dropped us in front of our parents' front door in Ankara. This seems to be a classic story told to children all around the world. At other times I was even told that I was born in flight. Was I born on a plane traveling somewhere in Europe? Or perhaps while going to Turkey? How unusual it was to be treated as if I was a member of the alleged Armenian dogs there, and forced into feeling embarrassed all the time for belonging to that race throughout my childhood, during my forced stay in that country, which in reality was no home to me. Another enigma was that my father preferred me to be registered as being born somewhere in Turkey, because they once had properties there. I often asked, but got no true answers from anybody. I believe he was dreaming about something impossible to regain. It did not make any sense because, in the first place, I was the unwanted child, as far as he was concerned. Probably his friends or other relatives convinced him that he could benefit from this and should think twice before getting rid of me. This enigma has remained in my mind up until now, whenever I think about their heated debates during so-called family gatherings. But many things were still completely hidden from us. For example, they always avoided talking about our grandparents' unusual tattoos. On their wrists and arms were numbers, and a star, which we were to learn symbolized the Star of David. That word and the emblem were most certainly Jewish, and also Grant's words such as, "My sweet love, there was too much suffering, and it is better we do not speak anything more of it for now," were quite a concern. Obviously, her and the other elderly relatives' pasts were painful memories. Possibly they had escaped from it all and ended up in Istanbul seeking refuge.